Hello, welcome to our session on fostering psychological safety in an educational environment. I think most of us would agree that the first priority of our schools is safety. Sadly, for all the good that happens in schools, every day, attention from the media typically only occurs when that safety is breached. But usually those news stories focus on the physical safety of the people on our campuses. And as important as that physical safety is, today we are here to talk about psychological safety in our schools. My name is Dr. Tammy Lynn Woody, and it's my pleasure to facilitate our conversation during this session. So, briefly, my professional experiences include serving as a dean of a post secondary school of education. I spent many years as an acting elementary school counselor and then serving on various state committees to inform policy related to counseling in a school setting. I love my current role serving as a program chair for the College of Education here at the University of Phoenix. Joining me today are my esteemed colleagues, Dr. Rodney Luster and Dr. Gina Coffaro. So I'll introduce these two underachievers here. Dr. Rodney Luster is an author of many publications, including articles for academic journals. I think he has an ebook on depression, blogs. He's the lead designer of the University of Phoenix research periodical called The Phoenix Scholar. He's a practicing counselor who offers psychological counseling, life coaching, industry consulting, not to mention that he's the senior director of research strategy, innovation, and development for the College of Doctoral Studies for the University of Phoenix. So, Rodney, when we started talking about this session, one of our team members immediately thought of you. So your advocacy is apparent to those around you. Can you share a little about why the topic of inclusive leadership, why it resonates with you?
It's an important topic. For me, I run also the Center for Leadership Studies and Organizational Research. So leadership is a pivotal component of that. And then when I think about leaders' behaviors and how they can actually be a predictor of employees' sense of psychological safety, that is in itself another important factor. And so when we think about an employee's identification with their leader, and that's consistent with their identification with the organization, then what we look at from researchers is what's been demonstrated is that when followers of an organization, they have that identification, they'll be more inclined to help their organization succeed when they feel that connection. And so here, psychological safety sort of becomes the important element here. So if we accept that premise that I just mentioned is true, then it becomes an important feature of ensuring that employees do feel safe otherwise. And that again is an important part of helping establish that relationship between identification, leadership, and psychological safety. So that's part of why I'm interested in this topic.
Great. Thank you so much for providing that background. Let me also introduce to you Dr. Gina Coffaro. So, Dr. Coffaro currently serves as a superintendent of schools for a K-8 public school district in northern New Jersey. She has over 25 years' experience as a teacher, I think both a mental health counselor and a school counselor, a principal, an academic leader. I think if you name it, Gina's done it. Um, she is also one of our standout University of Phoenix College of Education faculty members for over a decade. And I just found out this week that she was featured on Rachel Ray because she's a talented chef. So, talk about well rounded. Gina, would you like to share a little bit about your journey as an inclusive leader who creates safe spaces?
Thank you, Dr. Woody. Pleasure to be here with both you and Ronnie today as well. And great pleasure to be amongst a group of educators because your jobs, our jobs are the most important that we have and always and most in particular right now. When we share our experiences when we come together as educators, and especially the past 2 years post-pandemic, and also what we're seeing across the news lately regarding schools, we're starting to realize we have to come together and have more conversations on what it means to be safe in the work environment as educators, as teachers, as leaders. Psychological safety is something that we often don't necessarily bring to a faculty meeting and have conversations on. And I think it is extremely time sensitive that we begin to do so. We have to keep in mind, and I always quote Maya Angelou, that people will never forget how you make them feel. And as a leader, it is more important now today than ever that we come together and we invite one another to a common table and we share our experiences in our learning environments. And as you said earlier, if we do not feel safe, we are not able to perform successfully in the work that we do. So I look forward, so genuinely forward to spending time with you all today. And it's a great honor and a privilege to just simply engage in professional dialogue and conversation on what it means to be psychologically safe so that we all can better perform the work that we do, which at the end of the day is to make sure that we are providing learning for our students and being the best educators that we can be each day.
Thank you so much, Gina. It is wonderful to have both of you here. Just even in our conversations leading up to this, I feel like I have learned so much from both of you. So, a couple quick housekeeping tips before we begin. We do want this to be interactive, so we're going to be asking quite a few chat questions here. Feel free to just, be very active in our chat with us. Um, Really quickly, if you're looking for a way to maybe organize your thoughts around this session. We chatted about this as well before we began. You might want to just jot down, a Word document, notes, however you want to do it, but just jot down your own reflections, like what strikes you immediately. Just what comes to top of mind. And then as the speakers say things that resonate with you, then please go ahead and make a note of those. And then maybe just kind of a little section or a space for some takeaways or some kernels that you think might be applicable and how you could kind of pragmatically apply some things to your organizations. So that made sense to us when we were talking about maybe how you could structure some takeaways from this conversation. So we're going to move to our slide where you're seeing the outcomes for today's session. And by the end of our time together, our goal is for you to, of course, first understand what psychological safety is. Secondly, we want you to be able to identify when organizations are not psychologically safe, and then also learn the foundations of how to foster psychological safety in an educational environment. So we're going to pause here. We want to hear about you all at this moment. So just take a second, go ahead and hop here in the chat with us. Tell us a little bit about the current role that you're serving. We're just wondering, kind of how many teachers, building administrators, district administrators, higher ed faculty, higher ed leaders, etc., maybe even a state agency. So just tell us a little bit about yourself. I'm going to be checking here in the chat to see what's going on. Yay, I see. I'm liking these LinkedIn. I won't have time to hop in there right now, but I'm seeing some just nice variety here, which is wonderful. That was our intent. See some familiar names here as well, so that's wonderful. All right, well, let me go ahead and now that I have a good sense of those of you who joined us, and again, thank you for your time. We realize it's a finite resource, and we're very appreciative that you took time out of your busy day just to join us. So, um, you know, one of the participants, just or not a participant, but a panelist said, I think in one of yesterday's sessions, not all feedback is applicable to your situation, but he said you need to be able to hear it in its entirety and then kind of choose wisely what serves you and your purposes. So, in that spirit, we're going to go ahead and get going here. We'll start with the basics. So, what is psychological safety? And again, feel free to just put, your definition, whatever comes to mind for you about psychological safety in. Let's focus on educational settings. And Rodney, I'm going to turn it over to you now. Will you just kind of begin by talking maybe generally about psychological safety?
Absolutely. And it's something that I help patients with in my own practice who are trying to find a way to approach that. And when we say psychological safety, we should be thinking about, the ability to deploy or employ your sense of self without the fear of any kind of negative outcomes. I think when we look at it on that basis, that's an important point. How I feel approaching an annual review. We'll just use that as an example, or things like that. Oftentimes, uh, psychological safety and the underpinning of that is fear. And fear is sort of the great propagator when we think of the counterpoint here, because it is the thing that stands up either a feeling of, hey, I feel secure in this environment, or I don't. And so we can add to that trust, which is an important part of that too. So when I'm dealing with patients who are struggling because they don't feel safe in whatever they're doing, we have to talk about things that are really sort of our intrinsic responses to those things. So it could be the way that we have a conscious orientation to that particular thing that is making us fearful. And that's based a lot, we can go back to Eric Erickson and his ideas on trust versus mistrust, all the way back to infancy, and a lot of that we do bring in to our adult lives too. And sometimes it is the child fears that are operating on the adult. We see it, for instance, with people who are afraid of math. And that's based on experiences early on where they didn't feel safe. Maybe it was a situation where they were embarrassed in front of the rest of the class, or things like that. So when we look at this idea of fear, we have to look at it as, hey, this is the sort of the undermining element of feeling psychologically safe. And sometimes we do have, and I know this term has kind of floated around during the conference. We are engaged, especially with COVID and some of the things that we've seen as a result of that, and then also the confluent factors that have arisen, where people, in COVID didn't feel safe for a lot of reasons, but then you start bringing in other social aggressions, the things with policing and social injustice and things like that. And so that starts compromising many people's feelings of feeling safe. And then you have educators who are sort of on the front lines with healthcare, and they're still in the classrooms, and they're still having to work through a lot of these things. So fear was a huge compromising factor. So it goes without saying that we now understand why people are starting to act a bit weird coming out of some of this, because it has been very isolative in many ways, and so these environments, these VUCA environments that are volatile and uncertain, complex and ambiguous, become a factor in that too, where for teachers especially, it's time to wear masks, or it's time to ensure that all my students are wearing masks, and then all the things that were happening. We're in a hybrid environment, we're in school, we're out of school, there were a lot of compromising factors there. So when we talk about fear, and this adaptive reflex that we have to fear, this orienting response as well, what we focus on, and typically that's the things that have biological or social significance that we're focusing on, and that can propagate fear. And fear lives back here, back in the limbic system of our own brain. So if we're feeling something and it's emotional and we don't feel psychologically safe, we're probably back here somewhere, and that has something to do with memories, and memories that are probably not good, or our experiences with these kind of things. So if we're back here, we're probably in a bit of fight or flight response as well too. So it's hard to feel safe when you're in that emotional part of your brain. So trying to get back up front is it can be difficult, because that takes up a lot of cortical real estate when we don't feel psychologically safe. We are perseverating and focused on why we don't feel safe, as opposed to maybe the logic aspect of that part of it. So that's the long-winded version of it. So I'll turn that back to you, Tammy.
Thank you. Well, I'm seeing some great comments here in the chat. Um, Pam, you mentioned that you were making sure you had the words right here: the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And yes, you've got it right. Seeing some great comments about teachers just feeling no longer safe over, things that we used to do, such as just reading a book in the classroom. So wonderful comments here in the chat. And I just want to make sure that we're engaging there as well. So, I think my personal working definition of psychological safety is just kind of the belief that I'm not going to be maybe humiliated, belittled, or ignored. Feeling valued and respected, and a sense of belonging, even if I'm disagreeing with people. And so that's kind of my working definition. But Gina, from your practitioner's perspective, would you talk to us a little bit about what you think psychological safety is?
Absolutely, Tammy. Thank you. Rodney, very important information. So if I can dovetail a little bit off of what you were sharing, as a school superintendent, my most important job each day is safety. And for years now in education, safety doesn't necessarily focus on the emotional safety, the mental health perspective, the wellness perspective, the psychological safety of our employees and our students. But when we look at it from a staffing perspective, and I know when you shared earlier, Rodney, when a teacher has to get observed, that's a very small example. But any of us, when we feel like we're being watched, it puts us in a position of insecurity because we're being judged. And our past experiences, if they were not positive, we don't trust the leadership. We might not potentially trust the process or the change that is occurring if there is an evaluation model that is simply changed. The pandemic opened the classroom doors to the world. So prior to 2020, March of 2020, there was a lot of autonomy in teaching, and blessed autonomy to be able to go into a classroom and I apologize, I wasn't able to see the name quick enough, but in the chat box, someone shared, you can't even comfortably read a book that's age appropriate any longer without it potentially being turned into something that's highly inappropriate, and it was not, because of the media, social media, the topics that are out there, and they're heavy topics, and they're attacking at the core and the value in the center of what teachers do, which is to simply educate and to provide those learning environments in which children come every day to learn. They love being with their teachers, but when a teacher does not feel that they are comfortable in the work environment and that their psychological safety is halted because of what's going on around them, that's where the leadership role has to come in and step forward and say, I got you on this one. Board meetings have changed. And I can tell you as a school superintendent, I've been in very changing board meetings. And I have been in meetings where people had come forward at the microphone and 2 or 3 minutes and turned a conversation into something that was not positive. It's my responsibility to provide that safe environment in that meeting, to be vocal and supportive of the work that we do. And sometimes leaders are afraid to do that because, like Rodney said, there's humiliation when you're standing up in front of a group. It is very difficult to feel like you're being judged. But when we look at the most basic human need to feel accepted and connected and to feel belonging in the work that we do, at the core and the center of being psychologically safe is the inclusivity of knowing that we have the leadership surrounding a team of teachers in which they're going to be successful because they are part of a team that wants to work together. What's safe for one group could be polarizing for another. And the example I gave is a school board meeting. we're, we have a teacher shortage nationally. And when people are, young adults are going into their undergraduate programs, they're seeing what's occurring on the news, and it's making them step back a little bit and say, I'm not so sure I want to do that. Do I want to be judged by someone who doesn't really truly understand or want to understand the truth behind the work that we're doing as educators? It could be one small perspective, and the world of social media could take that perspective and change the lens in which other people are looking at it. And that creates a trust issue, which does harm the environment from a psychological safety perspective. When we look at VUCA, the volatility around education, the uncertainty, the complexity and the when things are ambiguous, you don't feel comfortable. We lost the autonomy when the pandemic occurred because of the lens of the world being open to the classroom, and then the hybrid experience, as Rodney has shared. And post-pandemic, what does that mean for us as educators? As a leader, my job has changed. While my first and most important priority was always safety in the school setting, it has to shift to that wellness safety mindset. And you have to be an aware leader. You have to be present in the moment. You can't be standing behind. You have to be in front, because your teachers need to come to work, and they need to be in an environment in which they feel part of that school family and that learning community, and they can collaborate and their voices can be heard and they don't feel they're being judged. So, from that perspective, Tammy, that's why this Inclusive Leadership Summit and the time we're spending together today, just to engage a fine group of educators on what is psychological safety. It is so important, and again, time sensitive. So I'm appreciative to have the opportunity for us to engage in this together.
Thank you so much for that. Well, both of you brought up a couple things that we talked about as we started rolling into what we really wanted to touch on during this session. One thing that strikes me, and I think Gina, you brought it up in one of our earlier sessions as well when we were working on this. Not only did the world get us to suddenly step into our classrooms, but they stepped into a mess that was not our classrooms. And so we're being judged by, like kind of the worst, your worst day at work, everyone got to see um, up front, like writ large. And that was not indicative of the work we do. That was indicative of many other, societal, political, health. There were just so many issues there. But I feel like, we're still being judged as professional educators based on that line of sight that suddenly people were in our classrooms with us. So that's one thing that I know we talked about. The other was just hang on to some of your questions. We talked quite a bit about, we understand that for one group of people, what creates psychological safety might in fact be uncomfortable for others. And so we had many conversations here about how do we make this real for you all? What do we do to fully kind of delve into some of the challenges? So we're going to try to hang on to a little space at the end here to maybe get into that a little bit more. But moving on, we hope this first go around here just kind of helped you all solidify your own definition of psychological safety. So let's hop into a chat question. We're going to go to our first chat, which is, what are some factors that create fear in our educational settings? So again, this might be a nice time to talk about some of these polarizing conversations and what you've observed, what you're feeling. We would love to hear from you all about this. Rodney, while we're kind of keeping an eye on the chat here, would you go ahead and talk a little bit, maybe help us conceptualize or theorize? Will you talk a little bit about your research in the area of virtuous leadership and what effect that has on creating a safe environment?
Absolutely. And I think that's where we find a potential correlation between what we saw in the pandemic and within industry and leaders who emerged as doing the right thing, we might want to say. And a lot of that we can turn back to research on virtuous leaders, relational leaders, that kind of theoretical composition of a leader who who really does look to making sure people are safe, the organization, the human capital that they manage. A great example of that during the pandemic, and not too far away from where I live, one of our grocery stores, a local one, um, happened to be over there during the time where Texas also had a huge sort of blackout with electricity and things like that. It was the middle of the day, and in this large grocery store, everything blacked out. Everything, nothing was working at the time, and the management there did such a wonderful thing. They empowered all their employees to just tell people, you know whatever you've got in your grocery carts, you can take, and just make sure that everyone is safe and that we're all accounted for. And they did the right thing. It was quite a gesture in the community, and it made some of the papers, and just excellent example of really, looking at the opportunity to lead by virtues and values that are important to an organization. Being empathetic, being able to understand, to be compassionate, to empower others. And that's what this summit is about too. We're looking at that inclusivity, the ability to empower workers, just like in the example I gave. That those managers gave their workers the power to make decisions, to act in the best way for the customers as well as for all of the staff, and did so, and the returns were huge. It fostered a feeling amongst the community that, hey, this place cares about us. That's a grocery store I want to go to. That's a place I want to be. And that same thing, we see in sort of the leadership research and what's coming about. And virtuous leaders, of course, are those that really engage the humanness, that aspect of, hey, these are the important values, and we know that having the employees who feel safe, who feel cared for, are going to return that to us, twofold, and in work production, in how they feel about their work, how they identify with their work. I mentioned that earlier. Being able to identify with your organization, being proud of that, being able to make decisions. And so what we saw in the community, with a lot of the things that were happening, and I think as well amongst teachers and school districts, is there were so many things happening, and you had even the challenges between school districts and leaders within those districts that were trying to do the right thing, and challenging some of those even larger landscapes of, hey, you know what, we think this is right, and some of these administrators were like, I don't think it's right. I don't know that we're doing the best thing for our teachers or our students right now. And that became a very volatile point, but it was interesting to see some of those leaders who were standing up there, that they were standing on virtuous leadership as their platform in many ways. And even if they didn't know that, a lot of that was taking the best interest at heart of these things. And that happens sometimes too. We've seen that arise because of these VUCA circumstances, these environments that propagate that and bring that to life. And so, part of this too, is that idea, that if we don't feel psychologically safe, and we don't have a leader that makes us feel that way. Part of it is that we can't take risk, and that's an interpersonal risk that we might be taking if I'm a superintendent, or I'm a principal, or I'm a teacher, and I'm trying to do what I feel is the right thing for everybody, our or that I feel there's something inherently wrong in this situation. It becomes tough because that's an interpersonal intrinsic risk that I'm taking. Will my leader support me in that? Will my school district support that? How do I feel about those things when I need to engage them? Or do I step back and recede from that because I'm afraid to take that kind of risk? Inherently it becomes very challenging. So the idea of a virtuous leader, and teachers can be virtuous leaders, superintendents, virtuous leaders, all the way up. And the important aspect of that is we're seeing the call for that more. I think that's emerging in the research, and we're kind of building the engine while it's running as a researcher. We're starting to see those things. We started to see out of the box kind of things happening in research during some of these volatile conditions that were happening, especially in education. And we started to see researchers jumping into that and looking at what are the dynamics here that are floating and emerging to the top here that we're seeing, and we're also seeing some things that were happening because roles were set in opposition. A superintendent's role is to do certain things. A principal's role is to do certain things. A teacher's role is to do certain things. And sometimes those goals are set in opposition, not intentionally to create friction, but because this is the role and these are the things that go with it. So we're starting to learn about a lot about how those kind of things really affect decisions. And virtuous leaders have to tap into sort of that concentrated focus, that orientation to, at the end of the day, is it about the overriding importance of hey, we're great statistically because we're pushing everything. Are we taking care of people and really addressing the things that everyone needs in order to flourish? So, again, this is where virtuous leadership comes in. And I think that's a great connector to what we're talking about when we're talking about, diversity and equity and inclusiveness and belonging.
I 100% agree. So, Gina, I'm going to turn to you now. Can you talk to us a little bit about why psychological safety is so critical to healthy school environments? And then, how do we know when our spaces are not safe?
Ronnie, thank you, and Tammy. And I see so many great comments in the chat. And Ronnie, yours is up right now. And you had one earlier on resiliency. And that is a word that I use often. So let's start with a little small example. When we talk about, as Ronnie's sharing in the chat, situational awareness, no one had an understanding of what really was coming when schools were shut down in March of 2020. It was a time in the history of our education system in which we had to pivot in a moment's notice, and we weren't equipped from a technology perspective. So the districts that did not have those resources, it caused a lot of parents to become very angry. So how do we approach that with regards from a psychological safety perspective? No one had time to give any thought because you just had to do. So the teachers were at the front line, and that's what parents were saying. And behind the scenes, you had the principals and the superintendents. When we look at something as simple as giving time to our teachers from a wellness perspective, because if we don't put at the forefront what our staff needs are, we can't be those educators for our students. And then we're exhausted emotionally to provide that additional resource in time for our parent community. So one of the things that we need to take a look at is how do we structure during the school day, because we really are very limited in the amount of time we have with our children. We're really with them 6 hours a day. And then you have to put in time for teacher prep, time for teacher lunch. There's elective courses if you're at a high school level. There's early release release, they come in late, a K through 8, your schedule's pretty scripted. At the end of the day, people are tired. And that window of time between 2:45 and 4 o'clock is a window of exhaustion, I call it. So I sat down with my cohort of educators within the region I'm a part of, and I had put in what I called Wellness Mondays. So we always have traditionally 4 faculty meetings a month. So why is this important to share here? Well, 2 years ago, we might not have done that, and we might not have been aware. And the resiliency and the recognition that our staff were tired, and they were tired because there was fear. They were tired because they were being judged. They didn't feel they were accepted within the community of parents. They needed time for their families, and they were afraid of getting sick. So the energy that was being put out with regards to teaching our children shifted and pivoted and changed. Along with that, you have leaders that have not changed because there's fear in change. And I share this often. I do a colloquium twice a year, and one of the things I do first with new teachers who move my cheese, because change brings the mindset of being judged. It brings with it, am I going to be safe? Is there a contingency plan for if I don't like the way I feel in the work that I do? So you have to provide that environment for teachers to understand, but more importantly, leaders to understand. When you're observing a classroom post-pandemic with first graders, or we'll say current second graders, because they were the kindergartners and first graders most impacted, their ability to sit has changed. So you can't be looking at a classroom teacher and expecting them to feel psychologically safe during an evaluative process when you're commenting on that the children aren't seated properly at their seats. That should no longer be part of an evaluation model. That's a very small example. And leaders are often trained to do. They're not necessarily trained to react and think, and they're not always programmed to be empathetic. They need to be. Time is of the essence. They have to be. They have to not be reactive any longer. They have to be proactive in their planning and how they articulate the words that they're choosing with their staff. And if it means that Mondays we could do faculty meetings differently because our staff need that time to feel safe. And I think it was Julie in the chat who mentioned physical safety. Physical safety is as important to the emotional safety. And both have to go hand in hand. They're not separate. And physical safety, yes, we've been talking for years in education about what that means from a setting of, we have 2 districts local to me a week ago had bomb threats called in. That hasn't stopped during COVID. That hasn't changed. So what does it mean to be physically safe as an educator? We have to continue to instill trust. And you eloquently talked about that, Rodney. And when we don't have trust in the work environment, we end up with underlying tones of fear because there's misunderstanding. And the way we communicate and the words that we choose, and sometimes email could be highly misunderstood. So the interpersonal conversations as a school leader, as a superintendent, have to take place via phone call. It can't just always be via an email. We've invited the world into our classrooms. We did not have a choice, and we may not have a choice going forward. The world has changed, the way we look at the lens of education. But we have to bring back the ability to provide that environment in which our teachers feel safe, because the leadership is there to support them. And, leaders need to model what needs to be done in front of the students so that they feel safe. So if you're observing a classroom, those pre-observation conference times are an opportunity. Get to know your staff. Ask them how they're doing. Don't make it just about an observation. Make it about that partnership and those intangibles that you bring to the table as a leader. When you have that mindset that you're leading people and not just moving something forward of a product, because the children are not products, they're people. And Donald, you're right. Forget the babies coming into a preschool environment during the onset of a pandemic. There's fear that they bring to the table. So the time, from a psychological safety perspective, that we put in with our staff is one of the greatest gifts that we can give as leaders. And we have to make that time, and we have to be empathetic, and we have to be present in the moment, because if we don't, we're not going to be able to be resilient, and we're not going to be able to provide the leadership in which we can stand in front and turn around, and that there's people with us. Because if you're a superintendent and you turn around and you have high levels of staff attrition because people don't want to work in the environment in which you are setting the tone for, that means there's a psychological safety underlying tone in which staff aren't feeling appreciated. And when we also look at the impact of social media and the effect it has on teachers from being authentic and the work that they're doing in the classroom, and parents could post a homework assignment nowadays. And I've had that happen to me. I had a parent post a homework assignment that she did not agree with. And instead of calling the teacher, she posted it on social media. So it ended up at a board meeting. And it's my job to protect and to guide and to shape. And you have to be able to stand in front as that leader. Yeah, there's days I'm afraid. I don't want to be yelled at and screamed at, because we all get that. But it's more important that my teachers feel safe and that I'm there to guide them and support them and walk beside them. When we discuss psychological safety and there's board meetings that become volatile, and children are having their parents show up at these meetings, and then they come to school the next day, especially your high school age students, they're more aware than your preschool, kindergarten, first, second, third. But children are smart. They hear. And it's up to us to be role models. Their eyes are just as big as their ears, and they hear and they see. And then they could come and they could share with their teacher what they might be hearing at home. So when we look at the lens from a perspective of the whole educational perspective from psychological safety, we have to have this conversation. And it has to be a continued conversation, because the scope and sequence of the landscape of education is not going to go backwards from 2 years ago. It's going to change, and there is going to be volatility. And when we look at those VUCA moments, we have to flip the way in which we control the narrative. Thank you, Tammy.
Thank you so much. So I'm loving what you and Rodney said, and every time I talk to you all, I hear a little bit more, and it's wonderful. I also love, the comments here in the chat. I'm finding during this inclusive leadership summit, there's so many times I feel very validated by comments I see in the chat, but what I like even more are the times when someone kind of stops me in my tracks and really makes me think, or has an alternative perspective. And again, I think that's part of the work that we're hoping to do here with this summit. So let me just move on. I feel like we've done a great job here. Hopefully you all agree, when we've just talked about psychologically safe environments, what that definition. But let's talk about, how do we know when we have it? So we're going to go to our next chat question here. What are some of the indicators that we have a psychologically safe environment? And again, I'm going to kind of stop here. And Rodney, I will go to you.
Yeah, definitely. I think when we're talking about the idea of how we foster that, we're looking at these environments that we feel that we have a feeling of belonging, a feeling of comfort, a level of comfort. When I counsel people, it's very important that we start off making sure that they feel that they're in a trusted environment, that they feel safe. Now, that's not always going to happen immediately. That takes a bit of time, because they may have some impression management that they're attending to first. Some of that is code switching. It's hey, what do they want to see versus what I and who I truly am. And Gina made some great comments regarding, hey, the pragmatics of psychological safe environments, which are important, especially within the schools. But we're talking about, hey, what can I do to help foster this, even if I'm a teacher or even a student, or whoever it is in the school system. How do I do this? How do I get that kind of environment going? And I think a lot of times it comes from how we focus on what we want, and what we want our classrooms to be. Is it a classroom that has some structure, but also has an opportunity to hear student voices? Is it an interaction between a principal and a teacher, where the teacher feels like they can talk without shaking, without feeling the physical feeling of almost a traumatic reaction, that when we start feeling like we're not safe, the words feel a bit shaky. Maybe the words don't come, or we have a hard time articulating or communicating what we're feeling because we're too afraid that we're going to be attacked in some way. And so, this is a world right now that we live in that has undergone a collective trauma. And so whether we want to admit that or not, or we don't have an understanding of that, we have, by psychological standards, just gone through that collectively. And a lot of us have experienced even things like vicarious trauma, where we've seen, watching the news and watching the things that have gone on in schools and all that kind of stuff. And so, all of that, taking that in, finding a safe spot requires, some work. It's like anything else. You have to exercise that muscle in order to make that happen. And those who take their eyes off of it, typically because they're busy, and yeah, and let's admit it, teachers' lives are extremely busy. They're trying to account for a lot of things in the classroom that are going on, and so trying to stay focused on that can be sometimes hard. And so, we're talking about intrinsic control here, orienting to the environment. Rapid onset of change throws a wrench into that sometimes. And it could be from a number of reasons. It could be, hey, we're shifting gears now. So I want all my teachers to now teach like this. And then they're like, oh my God, that's not my active teaching disposition. I can't adapt that way, or I'm scared, or I'm afraid, or so there's a lot of things that happen as a result. A lot of it relies, I think, it comes back to this idea of a practical wisdom in establishing psychological safe environments. We call it phronesis. And it's that idea of, we know what is really makes people safe. And I think we understand that. If you've ever seen Maslow's hierarchy, we know, hey, there are certain things that are just needed, for us to feel a certain way. Feeling valued, feeling that we have a voice, that we won't be attacked. Those are important elements there. I think to foster some of that, though, we have to also practice ceremonies that keep us oriented to that. And by that, what I mean is, for instance, when I counsel anybody, I will purposely take about 5 minutes before I engage that conversation to have my own special practice. What does that mean? It means, hey, knowing that I need to talk to myself for a minute and say, hey, whatever happens, I plan to let this go after I'm done. I will be there in the moment. I will, try to be a certain way, and I'll try to be focused. And so having those opportunities, even for teachers before they go in their classroom, even before principals engage conversations with teachers, even before, superintendents talk to their staff, I think having those psychological performance strategies of, hey, let me have some sort of ceremony before I do these things, so that I can help establish that psychologically safe conversation, is important. Because if that doesn't come inherently natural to me to be empathetic or things like that, then I need to practice that in order to help that. Because we can grow empathy. It's a nature nurture thing. Yes, some of us have more, some of us have less, but we can nurture that as well too. And I also think a forced opposites approach is an important part of this too. In our daily lives, if I'm a teacher and I'm feeling stressed because I don't feel safe all of the time, then again, maybe I do need to take a forced opposite approach to that feeling. If for instance my conversations are coming off very terse, then what would happen if I changed that? If I took the total opposite and did something that was unlike myself, that was very understanding in this moment, even though I'm challenged by it. or if a principal did that with a teacher who, was having a hard time regulating their own emotions. What does that situation require of me right now is the big question to help that safe space occur. What's required to make this safe space happen right now? And sometimes a forced opposite approach is necessary. We may feel angry about something, but what happens if we flip that and we say, okay, they're probably expecting me to act this way. So what if I acted differently? What would be the reaction? I guarantee you, I've tried this, I've done this with clients and patients, and they tell me about the dramatic sometimes shifts in conversations that can happen when they take a forced opposites approach. So doing things like that, having a sense of mindfulness. Again, that's what we're talking about, is being very oriented and focused and aware when these situations are happening. Um, you know, that is a part of making sure that we're exercising that muscle of really engaging the idea that we want to change things. We want to create these spaces. So we have to be focused on what we want to change, right? Otherwise, that needle doesn't move. It's the same thing when I talk to patients in therapy. We have to work on this. Otherwise, we're just talking right now. And unless we're applying this and practicing this, it's not going to change. And so, again, the things that have to happen, a lot of what Gina was saying were really great pragmatic ideas and thoughts around, hey, we need to change these things. We need to shift the way that we approach these things so that we can create those safe spaces. Because of course, and here again, we can look at this as a comprehensive issue, because we understand what it means to feel fear from the time we're infants. And it could be for small things, little things, our mother isn't around, or we need to, feel something. So we need her to hug us and things like that. We know that feeling, and it's carried with us through all our life. Now, fear is an important thing because it protects us, but we can also overuse that. And so that's where we get into these hypervigilant states where people may feel like, hey, you know what? I'm just afraid of even moving now because I'm afraid of being judged, or afraid of, like Gina was saying, some of the things that in education people are experiencing. So
Yeah.
that's my take on it, Tammy.
Awesome. Well, and we've talked, so Gina, our favorite word while we've been doing this. Do you want to riff on that for a minute? I'm going to let you riff now.
Mind leadership.
Just again, when we do and do not have a psychologically safe environment, like just what are those indicators that you see in your organization or that you create as an inclusive leader?
A psychological safe environment. It's interesting because 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and even today, depending on the group you are with or individuals you're with, they'll focus on education as being the outcome or standards driven. See, they're product driven. They're not people driven. And that has to, when we talk about a flipped classroom, we have to talk about flipping the leadership moment. And, a couple months ago, I had an opportunity, we're all so busy. We don't get that much time to really watch any television anymore. And we often do have the news on because we have to stay informed. So I happened to watch In Search of Greatness, and they had Jerry Rice on, and he was talking about his mom. And it was just one of those authentic moments. And he was saying how his mom was kind. And Jerry Rice is very mild-mannered, phenomenal athlete. I don't follow football per se, but I follow people, and I want to learn from how they motivate other people and how they are a change agent in the craft that they've chosen to do with their life. Because at the end of the day, the work that we do is a calling, that we chose to go into a profession, whether it's leadership or teaching or counseling, higher education, working in public education, private sector. When we're around people, it's because we care at a different level and we want to engage them at a different level. And most educators, if not all educators, are people pleasers. So we want to go about our day from a point of pleasing, from a point of making that difference for somebody who crosses paths with us. But the trauma that has occurred because of COVID, the pandemic, the media, and someone had eloquently put on there, how do we deal with that from an emotional perspective between the home and school? And when I focus on kind leadership and being that face in a community and having that presence and inviting the families or the parents or the caretakers or the grandparents or the older siblings to come to the table and be part of a conversation or a colloquium of care in which we are able to engage in the same end result, it changes the script and it changes the narrative in which the district is perceived. And there is a lot of the unknown because we don't necessarily have that voice as educators to confront what's coming at us. Curriculum fears, parents creating conversation on what's being taught when it's not necessarily being taught, or how it's being taught and it's not being taught that way. Creating pandemonium in a community with regards to the type of teaching that's occurring, why it's occurring, judging, and it pushes teachers into a corner. And it makes them say, I don't want to stand in front of my students any longer. So I have to stand in front of them because they're important to me and the children are important to me. So going through my day and doing 5-minute walkthroughs, it's not about seeing what's being taught. It's about making sure I'm making those connections with the teachers, with the students, with people. I can't sit behind a desk and be that change agent and invoke the understanding that we have to be raising resilient children because times have changed and we can't go back to the way it was because it isn't no longer that way. The world changed when social media entered it. The world of education changed. We have to flip the traditional lens. Instead of being a principal as an evaluator, be the principal as a coach or mentor. We have to foster trust from the top down. And I have to model and get in front of the community and say, we're here together. This is not just about ourselves. We have to work for the common goal, which is moving forward for the sake of the children and making sure we provide that safe environment for them. But we can't do so when our teachers are not feeling that way. So I like to annually do a couple times a year what I call my colloquium of care, and I do it several times of the year so I can provide different stakeholders opportunities to come together. And one of the things that I share at the time with them is what I call the triangle of learning and care. And what this is, it's and why a triangle? We can talk about that because you can flip it, right? And depending on the way you're looking at it from a congruent perspective, you can change the lens in which it's the focus at that moment. But there's social emotional wellness awareness in this triangle. There's supportive teaching, there's supportive leadership, and then there's professional development. And there's also community engagement. And the social emotional wellness is articulated at the very top of this triangle because we have to be aware as educators of the social emotional wellness, not just of our students. Yes, we need to, that lens has to be really, really zoomed in on them, but our staff and our stakeholders. And we have to have our board members. We have to be able to bring them to the table and have those conversations because sometimes they're afraid as well. And that's why the words that come out of their mouths at meetings are not articulated correctly because they're reacting. And then it creates an environment in which there's misunderstanding. But when we look at psychological safety in the center of the triangle, and we look at it from a triangle of learning and care, we can step back as educators, as people pleasers, as leaders, as teachers, and we can say that we have to have more professional development. We have to offer those parent university nights and those opportunities for parents to be educated on what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it. We have to provide supportive teaching in a safe place So when we're observing them, it's not about necessarily them, it's about what the students are doing. And we have to change the lens on the leadership. And we have to invite everyone together to say we're not on separate schools of thought. We're not on separate teams. We're here because we're moving children forward. They're the future of this. They're the future of our country. They're going to be the ones taking care of us someday. They're going to be the ones teaching our future generation someday. And the awesome opportunity we have from a perspective of us looking at psychological care and wellness and understanding what that means through the lens of leading is no other time I can say in the history of education is the time of essence right now. So it's just, I'm happy to share this, Tammy and Rodney. It's so important what you share on establishing boundaries and the mindfulness and metacognition. And when we're in the moment and we're mindful of the moment and we're aware, we understand better what moves people forward, which is how they feel. And we can't forget that in the work that we do.
So eloquently spoken, Gina. Thank you. I'm kind of curious about how we break this down and in other words, like what are the nuts and bolts of doing this? I love what both of you have said, but if we're really trying to kind of have some takeaways or go back to people, what have the two of you, Rodney, you mentioned that the forced opposite, and I told you I tried that this weekend too, with great success, and I should know it as a school counselor, a former school counselor, but I kind of forgot about that. So let's just, if we can take a minute, and Rodney, I'll start with you. Like, how do we put this into action? What do, excuse me, y'all, what do we do to foster psychological safety, kind of around us?
Sure, absolutely. I'm going to give everybody who's listening just a thing to do, a thing to practice, because I do think it starts from within. It starts within you. And Gina had reflected on this as well, too, because again, the change that we want to see has to start within us before we see it anywhere else. And that also means taking care of yourself. And so I think a lot of boundaries have been breached when we talk about COVID, this virus that breached people, it breached communities, it did a lot to break boundaries down, and people didn't feel safe even in their homes and then in schools, and teachers, I'm sure, were scared, and students were scared, and everything was amplified. So one of the things that you can do, and this is something you can do tonight, is to practice going back to something that comes from sensory motor psychology, which I think it's a very important thing. When we feel this sort of collective trauma, our bodies, it stores that adrenaline, and a big part of that is that's what feeds actions when we don't feel psychologically safe. It feeds our actions to respond, and maybe not in the right ways. And so we have to break down that feeling, that energy that is left within us, that resides within us. And I'm going to use a gross example, but if I were at a bus stop and I was going to step out in front of a bus by accident, and I stepped back real quick, that's a lot of scared energy that went through me. Now, what I might do is go home and think about that and think more and more about that. But what would happen if I just, this is going to sound crazy, if I just ran, if I just kept running down the street? People might think I'm crazy, but really I would be dispensing all of that traumatic energy. But we don't do that. And so when we are afraid and when we don't feel safe, we ruminate on these things, and boundaries, of course, are breached. So one thing that any of the teachers in the room, any of the superintendents, or anybody can do, even students, is, and I think it should be a daily practice, is at nighttime or in the morning, you can do this easy exercise, and it's a boundary exercise. It takes us back to feeling safe again, and you can do it. You can put things around you. Just make yourself a circle and you sit inside of that, And I don't care if it's socks or whatever that you put around you, but make that circle and sit in that circle and just feel that feeling that, hey, this is my boundaries right now. This is where I feel safe, and I've created this for myself. And just take a moment to reflect on that. Do it for 1 to 2 minutes, just kind of sitting in that circle and feeling what that feels like, because I think we lost a lot of that opportunity to feel that there were our own personal boundaries. But when we talk about stuff like change, and as Gina mentioned, and inclusivity, and all these other things, then we're talking about other things. We're talking about getting closer to things. And so for some of us, it may be that we're still traumatized in some way, or that we don't know how to articulate our feelings. And so having a daily practice that starts within yourself, and then also how you approach your classroom, how you approach your days, your conversations. If you're going to have a conversation with a teacher and you're a principal, you should have a minute or two to process that and think about how you want that conversation to go. What is it that I can do to create that safe space, and that in that conversation for that teacher who may not come to the conversation feeling very valued, or feeling safe? What can I do to open that up? And as a teacher, what can I do before I go into that conversation with that student, that I can do to know that I can handle that conversation? I can
Right.
do this. I can make that a productive conversation. And with a superintendent to their principals, the same thing. I think, again, these kind of practices have to start within, and that will ultimately, what we do within, and other people see that, just like Gina said, being a role model is an important part of that. If they see that emanating from you as a leader, as a teacher, there's a sense of control, and we've lost a lot of that locus of control,
Right.
that intrinsic ability to do that. I think that's where that's a nugget that I can give you guys who are listening right now, to say, hey, what did I get from this conference? I can do this at night tonight. I can practice this. I can have a ceremony before I go into any conversation, and I can start there.
That's great. And Rodney, I know you gave us some great resources. I think we're going to try to post those in the chat here shortly. One of the things I love is, Rodney, you kind of give us the internal. Gina, with your background as a counselor, I know you can do that for us as well, but we've been having you kind of do the external, the outward facing. So can you take and just speak to, the nuts and bolts? What do you do that shows, like, make that learning visible, as we say in teacher speak? Will you talk for a minute about this?
Absolutely. When we, there's words are powerful, verbal and written. So when we ask for any practical advice as a key takeaway from the time that we've all had together today, one of the things that I've found on my end from a practitioner's perspective is, when you send someone a little note, and I do this weekly, and I do it from custodial, maintenance, nursing, I do it from cafeteria, and I've also done it to most difficult parents who've attended board meetings and have been shouting. Now, I've had my colleagues say to me, Gina Coffaro, why on earth would you send that note to that parent? And I'm going to tell you why. And it's that forced opposite approach, Rodney, right? That's the counselor, right? Because people are afraid right now, and we don't know what's going on in people's homes. And I have to remind my leaders of that often. I have to remind the nurses of that. I have to remind the teachers of that. And they're going to go to the least path of resistance and who they can get to easiest, which is the principals, the classroom teachers, the superintendents, or at a board meeting. So when a parent comes to a board meeting, and I apologize, I didn't, that someone had posted earlier about how do we take this on emotionally from an intellectual perspective? Well, we have to be able to outreach, and we have to be able to not be afraid to say, hey, I appreciate you being at that meeting. Here's my number. I'm available anytime. Come and sit and meet with me. So when I have difficult people attend meetings, happens all the time, I put myself out there. And the first thing I do is I say, thank you for being at the meeting. I'm here for you. And every time I've sent that, you de-escalated the situation and you've changed the balance and the lens and the narrative in which someone is looking at something. Teachers included. When you have a student who you know is struggling in your classroom, send that note home to the family and say, your son or daughter did a great job today in class, and I just want you to know I recognize it and I appreciate you helping them at home. They might not be helping them at home. They might have someone else helping them at home, but you just invited that family to the table with you, and you just removed the fear barrier because there was trust built. When I send a thank you to the DPW in town who've helped me clean during snowstorms, the next snowstorm, they call me up and they're like, Gina, what do you need? We're here for you. So it's words. And that is such an important key takeaway. And I do believe it's a lost art, and it's handwritten words, because sometimes emails are great and I love email, sometimes a phone call works just as well. So if you take some time today and you want to give an affirmation to yourself as well, put a little sticky note that says you did a good job today and that you worked through a situation that might have been difficult, because we never thank ourselves, but we're very quick to judge ourselves. So we have to be reminded of the work that we're doing and the difference that we're making. And being a teacher and being a leader, doesn't matter the level you're at. It doesn't matter what level you're teaching. You are in the business of peopling. And we cannot lose sight, and we cannot forget the important connections that we have to make at that level. So I hope that this is something that you find beneficial. Nothing makes our day feel better than we know we touch someone's heart and mind.
You reminded me. So, I talk to my students. We've all heard like the compliment sandwich. That's how we're supposed to approach students. Like, you did something great. There's your little, Anyway, what I learned in my master's in counseling was that it is 3 glows for every grow. And so, it's kind of like you have to triplicate. Is that a word? um, that we're so wired, to your point, Gina, to be critical, that's how we function, as humans. As Rodney said, that fear drives us. And so you have to, that scale has to go way up here, for the positives to kind of offset one negative. So that's what I teach my students. 3 glows for a grow. And I try to live by that myself. I'm going to get to a couple of the questions in the comments here in a minute. But Rodney, one thing that you mentioned, at some point in our many conversations, and it has to do with some of the research. I don't want to, like, I'm trying to do a trailer, but this will prompt your memory. The research around, people were asked something about what they needed from their supervisor, or one question they had. Do you know what I'm talking about? Will you talk a little bit about that and how that factors into our conversation right now?
I don't know if was that Gina, was that part of something that you had contributed? Because I know I've done some research on that, but I thought I'd ask.
Yes. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, either one of you can. It was just the like what the one question was that everyone had. So one of you talked about the research, and that surprised me because I thought it would be a different answer.
Do you want me to jump in, Ronnie, or do you want to jump in?
I'll let you go first, Gina. I'll jump in after you.
So, people don't like to be watched. They don't like to be observed. So when you look at the research that's out there with regards to teacher observations, the one thing we're finally starting to become more aware of is the student-driven approach and not the teacher-driven. So it's not going in and saying, what did I catch you not doing right? What are we looking at that's going well? And I believe it was in the chat, and it's about flipping the lens of looking at the attitude of gratitude and going about the approach of what we're looking in a classroom from the perspective of that growth mindset. And we do have preschoolers who were babies during the pandemic. They didn't leave their houses. They didn't have that social interaction. We have kindergartners and first graders and second graders, and there's behavior issues in schools right now because they literally have to relearn how to socialize. It isn't natural for them because they're also afraid. They have masks on. Your desks were separated. We didn't have our learning centers. We didn't have our learning pods. Teacher materials, they no longer had the little, I call them my invite tables, where they could bring everyone together. So when we look at the research of observations, it is beginning to show that teachers will thrive in that supportive, collaborative, inclusive environment in which it's coaching, rather than when it's feedback, with there's no key takeaways. So that post observation moment, and to me, I model that daily, and it's called sitting down and talking and saying, first, how are you? How are you doing? How is your family?
Yep.
How are your students? Tell me one great thing about how you are feeling. That's the most important of the observation. I already know before I go into a classroom what's happening, because I should know. And so should the principal. So it's changing the lens in which we are part of the same team. We want the same outcomes. And with teacher shortages nationally, the opportunity that principals are going to have with so many new teachers coming in, and so much attrition happening, because the pandemic has changed people's interests because of the fear. We have to become those learning coaches, and we have to be that leadership person who is going to come in to that classroom, and that teacher's going to say, thank you for being here. I can't wait to show you what's happening. I'm the superintendent, and when a board member calls me, I'm like, oh my gosh, what did I do? I didn't do anything wrong. It's just that mindset that we always have, that we want to please and do well.
I think, and folding back on that, and then I'll answer that as well too, is from what we've seen emerging in the research, clarity, respect, and recognition become very prominent factors in that. And there's been some recent research that has come out as well, that one of the number one things that came out of that was that over 50% of employees did not feel valued. And so that's huge when we think about value, and a sense of belonging. And then we think of this conference from a DEIB perspective. If I don't feel valued, and I know teachers are going through this now, and we've known this for a long time. I think you guys should be getting paid double, triple what you make, just because the service that you offer is so important and so imperative. And how in the world we haven't gotten there yet, it does, it can make us angry at times. Why haven't we seen those movements there? But the value equation becomes the number one factor here. For if I don't feel valued, then I will leave. And we know that this new generation that is entering the teaching sphere, that they're more prone to leave if they don't feel valued, because a quality of life is important for them. They've learned it from their parents and from their parents, and they've witnessed it and seen it. So if value doesn't somehow make it into the lessons that we're trying to learn from this, then we've lost that potential for changing the things that we need to change. That's my take, Tammy.
Thank you. Uh, Jonathan Lewis had commented, and this was some of our earlier conversations as well, as one of the number one questions that people want to know about their supervisor is, does that person like me? And that was kind of fascinating to me. As my first year as a school counselor, I had a language arts teacher that I loved going into her classroom. And right at the beginning of my first year, I popped in to, just chat with her about how I was going to approach things. And she was busy, of course, everyone's busy. But I said, well, what are you doing? Or how should I get to know your students? And she said, I write a poem. about every student, just based on what I think I know. Um, and then I revisit that during the year, and I write a kind of a little ode to them at the end of the year. And, I thought that was I said, "What" like, new counselor, I said, "Well, what do you do if you don't like them very much?" And she said, "You always find, things to like about your students. Sometimes you have to, dig a little bit harder." And so that's something that strikes me kind of in the world that we live in right now, not only about your students and about your team and about your neighbors and your community. We have to dig a little sometimes to find the things that we like, but we can. There's always something to try to value and respect about others. um, we're kind of coming down to the wire here. I don't know, Rodney and Gina, if you have kind of, I feel like we're like speed dating. One last comment or thing to leave our wonderful audience with. Any final words of wisdom?
And Gina, I've been going first. You go ahead.
First of all, thank you all for being here, and Tammy and Rodney. It is now more than ever. We need leaders who are kind and who do like their team, because people do not, as you said, Tammy, want to be around people who they feel that don't like them, because then they don't perform, because then they're holding back, and they're scared, and they're fearful, and the insecurities come to the surface, and they can't help the people who need it the most, which is their students. You have to be able to, as a leader, and I'm a teacher first. That's who I am. Every day I go to work, and my job is to teach. It's to mentor the next generation of leaders. It's to mentor the next generation of teachers, and it's to mentor students. It's to be there and be present in the moment. Because if we're not there, then what does it say about us as a person? We have to be able to make the connection to the people we're around. And if we are making those connections, then we hopefully at the end of the day are making the difference that we need to make. And being aware and having this inclusive leadership summit and the opportunity to just have dialogue on what psychological safety is an important start. And it's not, it'll keep going from here. So the momentum has started, and just know that the work that you do is so important, and feel value in it, and value yourself, and give yourself those important affirmations that you are making that great difference, because we need each other, and we need good good people like everyone here today to go and continue to pay it forward and just make a difference, and help with building resiliency, and being that role model, and taking on those challenges, and being graceful each day in the work that we do. And Rodney, like you said, jumping in almost, and knowing that we have to have actionable moments in which we have to overcome the fear, and we overcome that when we have those open dialogues, and we remind ourselves that we are doing the best that we can do. And when you go to a leader, you're not afraid to approach them. And if you're approachable, that means the people who are on that receiving end are going to be able to move forward the most important part of the work that we do, which is those who are entrusted to our care each day, and that we can provide that environment for our students. So just I have nothing but gratitude for the work that every educator is doing each day. So thank you, Tammy.
Thank you. Rodney, anything else before we finish up?
Um, I think a lot of what I've heard, and Gina brings some great pragmatics to this because of her position and experience. I think, if it only could be like Dead Poet Society, when we think about, how we wished the teaching in the classroom would look, and there's some truth in that. I think, in fact, when we go into teaching, it is for the love of it. However, I see the potentials with what can be done, and we know this. We're at a crucial point in our society. There are so many polar opposites, and it's almost when we look at the divisions and the people, and there's more of that than there is more of the cohesion that's needed. And so, but we'll get there. We'll get there and each person makes a difference, I think, in all of this. But you know, what we want, or the change that we expect in the world, has to happen in us. And again, every person does their part, even if it's one encounter that you have with somebody in your day. Try a forced opposites approach. Try thinking about programming yourself before you go into that conversation, recalibrating, down regulating the emotional part of that, coming front brain, thinking logically about what's happening. Those are important. And then having at least 3 or 4 minutes in your evening, again, to reestablish boundaries, in the practice that I gave you guys. I think that's a big part of it. But again, it's going to take everybody to do this. And it's not the absence of fear. It's just leaning in and being able to modify it, so that we, without fear, we wouldn't be able to take care of ourselves. But we need to be able to modify it so that it doesn't eclipse the importance of the conversations that we have when it comes to, if we feel unsafe, then an important part of that is, how do we make ourselves feel safer first? And then, if we have the ability to communicate to that other person in a place where it's like, I think I can do this, I think I can tell them how I feel, then that'll happen. But it's hard if you're not feeling that yourself. So, hey, if you have to wear a thicker sweater in to have a conversation with somebody, just to keep yourself warm, keep your body in check, and feel comforted, then you do that. Whatever it takes. I tell clients, bring your favorite teddy bear, bring your blanket to the conversation, because I want them to not feel scared. So in order to do that, we have to take care of some of the physical stuff that happens when we do feel unsafe. And those are small things you can do. Hey, it's if I'm doing a presentation, maybe I want a sweater, just because it's me opening up to the world. So how do I feel safe again? I want to
Exactly.
feel that comfort. So that's my take on it, Tammy.
Got you. Well, I see that Donald talked about resiliency here, and he said, "I must be able to bend to help someone else not break," and I love that as well.
Absolutely.
Um, I teach positive psychology at the university, and we're on resiliency this week. And y'all can't see it, but I have this wonderful book I tell my students about, and it's called "Don't Forget to Sing in the Lifeboats." So you all, that might be what we're doing right now, but sing loud and sing proud. I know that we are going to prevail. Gina and Rodney, thank you so much for your time. Thank you to all of us who joined us for this just really important, empowering conversation. We're so appreciative to have your time and your attention and participation with us today. So I think with that, we are just about out of time, but thank you all so much. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, Tammy. Thank you.